Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Sustainable Commodities podcast, a podcast to help people navigate the ever-changing world of sustainability and sustainable commodities. I'm Barnaby Patchett, MD of 199 Agency, a marketing agency working in sustainability, and with me...
Hi, it's Judith Murdoch from Murdoch Associates, working in forestry commodities.
And in this episode, we're going to do a bit of a review on 2024, specifically looking at EUDR and kind of the latest news there, before looking forward to 2025 and thinking about what the biggest challenges and themes and issues there might be. We'll also be talking a little bit about our plans for the future of the podcast. So, Judith, 2024 is nearly over. What are your thoughts on the year in sustainable commodities?
Well, certainly it's scary the year has gone past so quickly, and I think everybody was just totally focused on the EUDR, so it not to go ahead was a complete letdown, although the vibes were coming. I think... And as we speak today, which is actually the 16th of December, the final vote is going to happen today to have this postponement. So I think for me, I think the whole of the industry just feels incredibly beaten up by it, and I'm still laughing over the amount of businesses that don't seem to know if they're in or out, and Annex 1 about the list of products that were chosen. I mean, I don't know, you sneaked off to the RSPO RT. So what was the vibe there when you got there about the EUDR?
So it was quite split, really. You had a lot of different opinions, as you can probably imagine. So on the a lot of the people, I suppose a lot of satellite monitoring and compliance organisations who were very dismayed that it was being delayed and potentially at that stage heavily diluted. They were angry at it. Also, some of the big players as well were quite angry that they'd spent probably millions getting ready for it, only to have it delayed, which is kind of rewarding those actors who'd ignored it. On the other side, I got to speak to growers, and I got to speak to smallholders, and I got to speak to people from the RSPO. I think there's a combination of views from some of the people in Southeast Asia were feeling like Europe was just dictating to them without understanding anything about anything really and how it might work. They all felt that smallholders were essentially being completely left out by the legislation. I remember speaking to someone, and I can't remember where they were from. Her name was Sophie, and she was in one of the sessions talking about some of the challenges because of the way that EUDR had categorized forests. So, basically, if there's a few trees over however many meters tall, it's a forest, and how that in very forested countries, and I think she was in Papua New Guinea, where they've still got a lot of primary forest, but some of it's degraded, some of it's not particularly high value. How could they develop any industry there? Because they couldn't under the EUDR. So there was a lot of mixed views on it. What are your general thoughts on it?
Well, now you're talking about forests, I think that's the big standout for me, because when you start comparing MSPO, RSPO, and the EUDR definitions on forests, they all differ. And then the bit for me that I don't get is, well, if I write a due diligence statement and I say, well, there's not been deforestation, and I'm basing my deforestation on this definition, is that still okay? And I think it's that attention to detail, isn't it? And I think it gives loopholes, or it gives confusion. Surely it would have been better to agree some global definitions. I don't know, easy for me to say, very easy for me to say, but agree some definitions on deforestation. But it isn't just deforestation, is it? Because actually what we're talking about is biodiversity. and we're talking about the fact that we're losing so much biodiversity in nature. And, what about the Cerrado and the grasslands that are not included? And yet, if that gets taken, that has an impact. So it isn't just about deforestation, it's about other areas. So that is certainly a big standout for me. And I guess the other bit, which we kind of touched on is that you're just looking at 7 commodities.
Yeah.
And where does that leave something like mining? Recent articles talking about the mining in Indonesia. Tin mining in Malaysia is how it all kind of started, with people going and investing, the British in particular, going for the tin in Malaysia. You've got no consideration about that. And the mining in particular is destroying forests to get lithium and things like that, which are all
Nickel,
about battery. Exactly. All about for batteries. So I think for me, a great idea, but it could have been so much better if it had begun to think about a holistic approach. And I think that's the bit that's missing. And I think you're right, is that people would just go, well, I won't deal with Europe then, because Europe volumes, and for me, particular specialist in palm oil, I think it's something like 6% of all palm oil trade goes through Europe. It's dropping all the time. And cocoa is something like 60% of all cocoa goes through Europe. So that is where, or why cocoa is such a big focus for Europe. So again, for palm oil, well, we don't really need Europe. We'll just go somewhere else.
I heard that directly from growers at RT, at the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil. They literally one said to me, I just won't bother. I'm just going to sell to China and India. Like straight to my face. This is because of EUDR.
Yeah.
So there's the iron law of unintended consequences again. I mean, you know my views on EUDR. I think the delay was probably, unfortunately, necessary because of their own lack of preparation and understanding of the supply chains. But it's the same as everyone else's. The intent's nice. Let's reduce deforestation. I think everyone supports that. But in terms of its implementation, good ideas don't make good legislation. And I think this is probably the gold standard in that. It's made by bureaucrats. It's not made by people who understand how supply chains work.
And also this whole thing, isn't it, about how it's going to put extra cost on to businesses when Europe, let's just include the UK in on this, is that the cost to businesses through energy increases, the fact that there's a war going on in Ukraine, people are dying in a near continent, and it's almost like it's forgotten, but that has major impacts on the harvesting of rapeseed and sunflower. And I just don't think people have considered the supply chains. And I mean, just my opening comment about the Annex 1, and particularly again on palm oil, where it's got a list of earlier chemicals, which if they can't come through to Europe, that could affect a lot of earlier chemicals businesses in Europe. And they will then go out and find sources or people who can make it in other continents. They won't bring it into Europe. And so Europe again is damaging its own economy by saying we don't want these commodities, but equally we'll import shampoo finished. Where's the logic in that?
Well, it's an accountancy trick, not a sustainability solution. The chemicals industry, you talk about it, that's dropped. We were just talking about it before we started, 26% in the UK below pre-pandemic levels because of energy prices, competition from China. But people aren't, those chemicals are still coming in. They're still being used in the UK. They're just coming in from elsewhere. And obviously that's one of the risks, bringing it back to EUDR, is that it just goes elsewhere. The problem goes elsewhere. And I'm still not convinced that any of the really big issues that both of us had with the legislation in terms of things like smallholder inclusion, in terms of the practicality, in terms of how they're going to enforce it, they still haven't been solved.
No. Yeah, country of risk is still not identified. the whole situation around movement of cattle is definitely up in the air, which will impact farmers in the UK. And as you've said, smallholders, which, let's get real. The big thing about smallholders is that they don't necessarily export to Europe because of where they sit in a country. But if they're constantly excluded in the areas that they could export to Europe, what happens to them? And I think, again, trying to encourage them to do the right thing and make a good standard of living is absolutely crucial. And again, no real concern about that. And interesting, I spoke to someone about cocoa in particular, and there was supposed to be lots of investment in smallholders around the cocoa industry. And that was one of the things that hadn't been put in place, which in the background is one of the reasons that the whole thing has slowed up and potentially failed. So again, if we don't improve smallholders, keep them on the land, farming in a sustainable way, you create all sorts of problems. So, it's definitely not been the best of years for legislation, and a whole load of effort. And and as you say, a lot of businesses had EU compliant material on the water because they had to. It doesn't come locally. It comes from a long way away, 3 months. So again, have they lost money or have people made money? At the end of the day, has it stopped deforestation? Potentially it has not. So
you undermine your moral authority as well as soon as you force people to comply with rules and then delay them. It's the boy who cried wolf.
Yes, definitely.
And it makes me think that, is this going to be another GDPR where, yes, you've got all the rules, but the compliance still isn't there. And this is 8 years since that came in. So what impact will it have? It has been quite demoralizing to follow the journey of EUDR over the last year from so many different perspectives. I've not heard anyone, and that's not true. I spoke to one person on the podcast, actually, very briefly, in over at RT, Leo Bottrill from Map Hubs too. And he said, look, I know it's got its problems, but this is the precedent needs to be set. It needs to go through, shouldn't be delayed. We need to do it. And I have some sympathy with that argument in terms of, yes, it's imperfect, but the intent is there, and then you can make it better when it's in, but you need to get it in first. But at the same time, I think that there's so many challenges around it that might not be quite... Well, it clearly wasn't doable in practice.
Yeah. And also, I mean, I know you spoke to Kat Barton from Chester Zoo, and I guess the bit that I always thought was that if people were talking about forestry's commodities and they were talking rubber and talking cattle, that it wasn't just, the story headline is always about palm oil. And I'm not saying that isn't right. It's massive amount of forest has been taken in Indonesia and Malaysia. But the point is for me was I thought that these broader conversations would mean that there was a conversation with consumers. And right now, consumers have no idea what the EUDR is. No. They have no idea that there was legislation to try and stop deforestation. And, if I ever introduce myself and tell people what I do, they say, sustainable palm oil? What's that? Palm oil's bad, isn't it? So then, then I'm the original bore. Let me tell you all about it. So it's exactly that. If we don't change consumer minds, and I'm not in any way thinking, it'll just happen overnight. It's a drip feed about getting people to look out for sustainable labels and have confidence in that they mean something. And if something is saying it's not causing deforestation, that it doesn't cause deforestation. But also the bit this whole legislation misses, I think a personal point, is putting forests back or putting at least wildlife corridors in. So again, biodiversity and thinking about the animals that we're losing and really big things that change people's minds about how they do things. And that's farmers throughout the world not just farmers in Indonesia or Malaysia, because again, like you say, they just go, well, actually, we've got another market somewhere else and we're not going to sell it to you.
Going back to that consumer perceptions thing, that was another big take home for me from RT. I wrote a blog on it actually, about just how unwilling the palm oil industry is, and I assume it's other industries as well, are to talk about the sustainability issues around it, and to talk about sustainability, actively promote it to consumers. Again, speaking to growers, especially over there, they were like, why should I bother? Why should I bother? It's lost. I've been doing it 30 years. There's no point. There's no point. They're going to keep eating it and we'll keep selling it, but there's no point talking to them about it. It was a very defeatist attitude. And I think a very unhelpful attitude, because consumer opinions can change. But they're not going to change unless people talk about them. Unless they make an effort. And, talking about Chester Zoo, they've had a really good campaign where they've been doing just that. The sustainable palm oil cities and then sustainable palm oil communities has been a really good proactive thing. That's I think that's in partnership with Ferrero as well, isn't it? And then obviously we're doing our bits, and there's a few kind of outliers, but in terms of the wider industry, if they came together with some unified positive messaging on what it can be and what consumers need to look for, they could make a change. I don't believe it can't change. For the first time ever with EUDR, they're being compared to other commodities. That's one of the few benefits for especially in palm. You're being compared to other commodities, so you can show what you're doing that others aren't. It takes that conversation away from palm being at the forefront, and there's a real opportunity. And it's at the same time that mainstream media's dying, and independent media's coming up, and you've got the opportunity to go out there and speak to people who aren't just tied to the same narratives they were 20 years ago. So I think that was a big take home. So I guess next year, with the delay, we will still be talking about EUDR on the podcast, but we're going to try and branch out a bit.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've been inspired by, talking to various different people, and I think it's holistic approach to everything. And yeah, I think keep an eye on the EUDR, but there's other legislation that's coming all the time that businesses are having to report on. And I think, science-based targets and scope 3 is massive. Yeah. Watching how people are trying to think about scope 3, and it comes back to, if you don't have traceability, how can you actually truly do scope 3? And EUDR gives a level of traceability, and, people such as, or the organisations such as RSPO, with their new IT platform when it gets launched, hopefully in the new year, will give traceability information to everybody in the supply chain. So I think we keep talking about it, but definitely the subjects of smallholders. I think one of the things I think when you've come back from the RT, you're very passionate about smallholders. And I think you're right. And it's like smallholders around the world are so important for a variety of different reasons. But it's a broader conversation, I think, that 2025 will bring. Yeah,
I agree. I think biodiversity, I think, has become, in 2024, I've heard more and more for the first time about the importance of biodiversity. I think if the previous 5 years were kind of myopic obsession with carbon, it does feel like we've moved beyond that in sustainability, into things like biodiversity, into smallholder inclusion a bit more this year. And I hope that those themes continue. What about some of the challenges
in the marketplace today?
Yeah, to do with sustainability, I guess, and the adoption of it.
I guess the biggest challenge is for a lot of businesses is resource. Sometimes knowing what is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
I think keep going back to that word traceability. Without understanding your supply chain, you actually really do struggle to deliver on sustainability. But actually, I guess the other bit as well is, doing something in your business. I mean, people who are listening to this, we know are from, big retailer groups and, big corporations. And then there are people who are just literally people that are founders and just interested. And it's like, get policies in place, but get policies that and can prove and you can understand it. And, just get talking about it, I guess. So the challenges for me are get real and don't put too much marketing spin on it, and really get to know what's in your supply chain and really challenge your supply chains. I was interested, I'll just go slightly off one is that I've just been involved in doing a questionnaire on Scope 3, and the questions still focus around EUDR. It's a UK company that is not going to be impacted by EUDR, yet they're using a questionnaire that's implying that they are. And it's asking a whole load of questions that actually, when they get the answer, I bet they don't actually know what they're going to do with it. So that's really what I think are the major challenges is to get the right data, but make sure you ask the right questions. And if you do get the data, what you're going to do with it, which ultimately is the issue with EUDR, a whole load of data that's not going to go anywhere.
I think in terms of the podcast, getting someone on to chat more about Scope 3, I've got a client who does quite a lot in that, so I'll probably try and get them on to chat about Scope 3. But there's some real benefits to that from if you're trying to reduce your emissions. Again, it comes back to traceability. Scope 3 is going to be the lion's share of those emissions in virtually every business there is. 80% or more in most businesses. And at the moment, if you're estimating your Scope 3, you're using industry averages. So, if you're you can be buying something that's significantly better than the industry averages, but unless you're measuring it, then you can't really claim it's any better. So you need that data. That data becomes increasingly important if you're going to hit your targets on things like Scope 3. In terms of the kind of the wider challenges as I see them, I think there's cost is obviously a big one. I think that's going to come into focus even more. You look at the political landscape, I guess, in America and in Europe, potentially not in the UK, but in wider Europe, there's a definite shift towards the right. There's stuff like Elon doing his Doge, cutting departments and cutting things. And that kind of level of government efficiency, I think, is going to mean that if people are going to do sustainability work, they need to be effective with it. Needs to be at least achieving its goals. I think for quite a long time in sustainability, and probably EUDR again is an example of this, that it's the thought that counts. The idea behind it's really good. Well, I don't think that going forward that's going to be enough. You're going to have to show impact, and you're going to have to show exactly what's going to happen as a result of your efforts, not just we think it might do this. And I think actually that's probably could be a good thing, as long as people keep investing in it.
Yeah, and investing in knowledge and training, because again, when we talk about Scope 3, it really is interesting when you say to people, well, what actually does that mean? And do you understand the 15 categories of Scope 3? And you get a few people going, and I think that says it all. So again, having confidence to just go out there and get the updates and the training and train your staff well. And just make sure that we keep talking, keep developing, keep using the data. And generally, keep going to say that word again, traceability. If you don't have it, you can't impact your supply chain.
No.
And it's no longer acceptable for people not to talk about some level of traceability, because that's the other problem is people think that because they're small, they can't get that information. Well, just ask for it. The more people, the smaller the business, and the more times you ask, people will start to believe they have to put that information out. And then I think the other bit for me is the impact of even big businesses. some businesses say, but we don't have the clout, but you've got more clout than you realise. So definitely doing a bit of that.
Well, it's the push-pull, isn't it? There's got to be, you've got to be demanding it from your side.
Yes.
If it's going to happen. And it has to go through the entire supply, well, especially with Scope 3, it's got to go through the entire supply chain because that's the only way you get the data.
Yeah.
So I think for next year, more Scope 3.
Yep.
More science-based targets.
Yes.
And potentially, what else are we going to, in terms of the podcast, we're going to be moving out beyond palm oil into some more commodities. We've kind of spoken to a lot of our, most of that's because of our background and our connections, but there's a lot of people we know outside of palm, and we've got some exciting guests lined up inside a lot of different commodities over the coming years to talk about some of the issues that face everything and some of the shared solutions too. Yeah,
no, definitely. And I think it's just things that people aren't aware of. So definitely that.
Yeah. So I think that's probably us, isn't it?
It sure is.
Great. Well, thank you very much for listening to the Sustainable Commodities podcast in 2024. All the episodes are still available on all of the different platforms. So go and have a listen back to some of them. And join us in 2025.
Yeah. Happy New Year.